Welcome back to Cinematic Century Chronicle, where I reflect on at least one film from every year between 1920 and 2020. Today, we're heading to Hollywood for one of the most iconic comedies of the silent era and one of the most breathtaking stunts ever filmed. This is Safety Last, released in 1923, starring Harold Lloyd. It's the film that made an image immortal, a man hanging from the hands of a giant clock high above the city. But Safety Last is much more than that single moment. It's a story about ambition, modern life, and the comedic danger of trying to climb your way to the top. Literally. Just a note before we start, this video contains spoilers. Safety Last is worth experiencing fresh, so if you haven't seen it yet, it's one of the easiest silent classics to enjoy. Fast-paced, funny, and still thrilling a century later. Harold Lloyd wasn't born into Hollywood royalty. He built his career step by step, much like the characters he played. After early bit parts in silent shorts, he struck gold with his Glasses character, a clean-cut, ambitious everyman whose optimism often led him into absurd predicaments. This character stood apart from Chaplin's vagrant or Keaton's stoic rebel. Lloyd was modern, urban, and relatable to America's growing middle class. In 1919, a publicity photo session nearly ended his career. A prop bomb exploded in his hand, destroying 2 fingers and partially blinding him. Few knew how severe the injury was, yet Lloyd returned to performing his own stunts, wearing a special glove to hide the prosthetic. That detail adds even more awe to Safety Last. Every time he dangles from the clock face or grips a ledge, he's doing it with a damaged hand. By the early 1920s, Lloyd was one of Hollywood's top box office draws, commanding creative control over his films. Safety Last marked the peak of his thrill comedy formula, blending physical danger with situational humor and emotional charm. The skyscraper climb wasn't just spectacle, it symbolized the upward drive of the 1920s, the belief that with enough nerve and ingenuity, anyone could rise to the top. In the silent era, many short comedies were structured around a series of visual gags or routines loosely stitched together. As comedy matured into feature films, some filmmakers began weaving those gags more tightly into a narrative, and Safety Last is one of the clearer examples of that shift. The premise is simple. A small-town boy moves to the big city to make good, promising to send for his sweetheart once he's successful. But instead of running a company, he's a lowly department store clerk barely scraping by. To impress both his girlfriend and his boss, he concocts a publicity stunt. His friend will climb the side of the store's skyscraper to attract crowds. Of course, when that plan goes wrong, he ends up doing the climb himself. The structure feels almost mathematical, a steady buildup of stakes, gags, and tension. Lloyd called it thrill comedy, combining laughs with real danger. By the time he's dangling from the clock, the audience's laughter has turned into gasps. The skyscraper sequence in Safety Last was filmed using a combination of rooftop facades and careful camera placement in downtown Los Angeles. Production notes describe how multiple building sets were constructed at different heights to give the illusion that Harold Lloyd was climbing a single, towering structure. Each portion of the climb was staged on a separate rooftop, with the camera angled downward to capture real streets below. The effect was achieved without optical tricks like rear projection. The sense of height came entirely from perspective and camera alignment. Walter London, the film's cinematographer, planned the camera setups to maintain continuity of light and horizon lines between shots. The facades were positioned close to the roof's edges so that the background depth and street traffic were visible in the frame. In several instances, wind affected the large clock prop, requiring retakes to preserve consistency. Although safety platforms and nets were placed just below the camera's field of view, the risk remained genuine. Lloyd rehearsed his movements repeatedly and worked without visible safety gear to preserve the illusion. Onlookers in nearby buildings reportedly gathered to watch, giving the crew an unexpected audience as they filmed each segment of the climb. The final sequence, with Lloyd dangling from the clock's hands, was captured across several days of shooting, combining wide rooftop views with close-ups filmed on controlled sets. The result remains one of the best documented examples of practical filmmaking used to simulate heights and tension without post-production effects. Lloyd believed that comedy worked best when every gag built naturally on the one before it. As he once explained, in comedy, one situation leads to another. One gag builds up its successor. Safety Last is a clear expression of that idea. Each obstacle during the climb isn't just a random joke, it's part of a continuous rhythm of setup and payoff that grows tighter as the film progresses. The climb itself functions almost like a perfectly timed routine. Each floor brings a new challenge: pigeons, a dog, a swinging rope, a clock's loose hands. Together, they form a carefully constructed sequence where tension and laughter rise in equal measure. Lloyd and his team rehearsed each moment precisely, ensuring that the humor came from the situation rather than from exaggerated performance. What makes the finale so effective is its precision. Every movement is calculated for maximum clarity and impact, not just for spectacle, but for storytelling. By the time Lloyd reaches the clock face, the audience has followed a logical chain of setups and payoffs that make the danger feel earned. It's a sequence that shows how silent comedy could be both physical and architectural, a structure built from gags, rhythm, and timing, rising higher with every laugh. While Safety Last is best remembered for its stunts, the performances make those moments resonate. Harold Lloyd plays the boy with his signature mix of determination, energy, and warmth. Unlike Buster Keaton's impassivity or Charlie Chaplin's melancholy, Lloyd's reactions feel spontaneous and optimistic. Audiences didn't laugh at him, they rooted for him. Mildred Davis, who would later become Lloyd's wife, brings sincerity to the girl, giving the story its emotional core. Bill Strother, credited as the Pal, was a real-life building climber known as the Human Spider. His public stunts reportedly inspired the film's premise, and he handled several of the wide climbing shots, while Lloyd performed the close-ups himself. Together, their performances create a tone that balances suspense with charm. The reason Safety Last remains as likable as it is thrilling. What makes Safety Last stand out visually isn't just its famous high-rise climax, it's how Lloyd and his team build rhythm and clarity into every shot leading up to it. Director Fred Neumeier and cinematographer Walter London used tight framing and simple, readable compositions to keep the action clear, even when chaos surrounded the characters. Every gag is easy to follow, every setup pays off cleanly. The editing follows that same precision. Rather than fast cutting for energy, the film builds suspense through pacing, holding just long enough on a shot for the audience to see both the setup and the consequence. Lloyd's timing is surgical. His reactions are always framed, so we can share both his surprise and his calculation as he works out the next move. The film's intertitles also deserve attention. They're wonderfully playful, often working in tandem with the visuals to deliver a joke rather than just convey dialogue. Early in the film, a title declares that the boy has seen the sunrise for the last time in Great Bend, cutting to an image of him behind bars with a noose in the background, only for us to learn he's simply leaving town, not heading for execution. Later, a title warns that the boy is in great danger, just as we see him swarmed at the store he works at, and near the finale, when the pal is chased by police, an intertitle quietly reads, "I'll be right back. Soon as I ditch the cop," in tiny lettering as he sprints away in the distance. These moments show how Safety Last used intertitles not as interruptions, but as part of the rhythm of the comedy itself. While Chaplin and Keaton often receive the most critical attention today, Lloyd's screen persona, optimistic, industrious, and self-reliant, reflected the values of 1920s America. His glasses character embodied the ambition and energy that appealed to audiences in an era defined by urban growth and self-made success. He continued making comedies throughout the decade, including Girl Shy, 1924, The Freshman, 1925, For Heaven's Sake, 1926, Speedy, 1928, and Welcome Danger, 1929. Each expanded on the combination of romance, risk, and physical ingenuity that had defined Safety Last. Lloyd also built one of the most successful independent careers in Hollywood. Through his own production company, he retained ownership of his films, a business decision uncommon at the time. That control contributed to his financial success and allowed him to supervise reissues and restorations later in life, such as Harold Lloyd's World of Comedy, 1962. Because his negatives remained intact under his stewardship, much of his work survived the transition from the silent to the sound era and could be preserved for modern audiences. Safety Last remains one of the defining comedies of the silent era, not just for its famous clock sequence, but for how carefully it builds tension, laughter, and spectacle into a single, cohesive experience. Harold Lloyd and his collaborators created a film that demonstrates how precision, timing, and performance could elevate comedy into something cinematic rather than vaudevillian. A century later, the image of Lloyd hanging from that clock endures as one of film history's most recognizable moments. It captures both the physical daring of silent era filmmaking and the optimism that characterized 1920s American cinema. Next time on Cinematic Century Chronicle, we'll look at a film from 1924 that explores performance and identity from a very different angle. Victor Sjöström's He Who Gets Slapped, a story of humiliation, revenge, and the tragedy behind the mask. Subscribe and join me as we continue to chronicle 100 years of film, one story at a time. Until next time, have a great rest of your day.